And that was a little confusing, and still is a little confusing in trying to deal with the MSBA on this. The following day, we had the secondary school building committee meeting the very next night, and the superintendent and I were there, and Cliff was there. And I brought to the committee the concerns that Mike had raised, and I think Karen, about the scope of the project and whether or not we had to emphasize with the MSBA that we wanted to look at this both buildings, which clearly we do. The architect that night, our consulting architect, explained, similar to what Cliff had said the night before, that the feasibility study will in fact include a proposal for improvements to both buildings, okay? And we weren't viewing it as exclusively a high school project. When the paper came out that week, I think the headline was something to the effect of, middle school out or something like
Right.
that. And that caused some concern with the secondary school building committee members and I think some other members. But the problem really was that the night at the school committee, there were two distinct discussions. One about whether we were considering both and how we were supposed to convey that to the MSBA. The second was on the enrollment. And when you read the story on the enrollment, it seemed like we had
Yes.
focused on that in the high school project as maybe the only aspect of this project, and that's incorrect. It was, and I'm not saying the paper was incorrect, I'm saying that the headline was a little misleading, and that the middle school is still part of the feasibility study, which will begin doing fairly soon as all these documents are sent and approved by the MSBA. I hope I haven't muddied it up more, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that the school committee is 100% behind the secondary facility, which includes both the middle school and the high school. Now, it may turn out that the MSBA, in collaboration with us, decides that we can't necessarily go in that direction, but we won't know that until we do the feasibility study.
Yep.
That's why we're doing the feasibility.
That's why we're
study.
doing the feasibility study. And this is it's a little bit different than what we're used to, and when Mike raised that question, I brought it to the secondary school building committee. It's a good question, and I think the architect, along with Chuck Carucci, tried to clarify it, and I think they did.
It's very helpful. Thank you, Jerry.
Any other questions, comments? Great. Okay, next we have, I think we need to briefly look at the 2012 school committee goals action plan for this year. I don't know if we really have to, this is just filling out what we talked about last week, right?
Exactly. You've had a chance to take a look at it. So tonight, if you review and approve it, those are your school committee goals and your action plan for the 2010-11 school year.
Yeah, and this is what we discussed last week, and Kathy's just basically filled out the timeline and goals. If anybody has any comments or questions, if not, I'll entertain a motion to approve our school committee goals action plan for 2010-2011.
So moved.
Motion by Cliff,
A second.
Oh, Jerry.
second by Jerry. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Okay, next we have budget goals and timetable. Carl?
Yes, thank you. In your packet, you see a copy of the present year's budget goals, and you also see a budget timetable. I would suggest, Mel, that first the committee review the present year's budget goals in an interest of updating them for the upcoming FY12 budget year.
I reviewed them. I had the same question that I think I asked in the goal workshop is a comprehensive 3-year budget something that should be our top goal? And then the other thing is I'd like to see a goal in here that talks about beginning to restore what we've cut out of the school system. And I was just starting to make a list, and I forgot about some of these things. I forgot about we cut the International Food and Cultures course at the middle school. I forgot that we cut 2 days out of the school year 2 years ago. We reduced our school year by 2 days. I forgot that the libraries still aren't staffed full-time by paraprofessionals, which they used to be. The computer labs, we've cut professional development days. Technology instruction specialists, I think is what, I don't know, or whatever we call those positions in the school. We only have, what, one of those?
One for 5 schools.
The 5 schools. As we heard Mr. Fauché tonight, we don't have enough classes at the middle school to keep the kids occupied. There's a lot to be restored in this budget, and I think we need to make that one of our goals. We need to start restoring some of these things.
We've had several years of level services that weren't quite level
Level
services.
services, so technically we're
Isn't that
under.
part of the goals that we
Right,
formulated?
but these are this
The
is
budget
Carl's
goals,
budget
yeah,
goals.
yeah.
And I think the 2 days is where we should start. We used to have our kids in school 182 days a year, which is 2 days more than the state requires, but which gives our kids an advantage, in my opinion. They're in school 2 more days, right?
So then I would propose that we would add, I don't know, number 7 here, to review reductions that have occurred over the last, I don't know, insert number of years you want to go back, and identify priorities for restoration.
Yeah, I think that should be.
I'll go
A
along with
goal.
that.
Okay. And I don't think there really need to be any bullet points, but essentially what I'd like
No.
us to see is,
4
let's
years.
figure out
Yeah.
what, everything that we've cut. I mean, there've been some give and take, but understanding that, maybe going back, I don't know, how many years do you guys, 4 years?
I think it's 4 years.
Mhm.
And then we would have to set a timetable for achieving that. I mean, I would like to sort of also include the impact, but I just don't think we have time to sort of think about the,
It's in the action plan, it's
It
the
is in
first
the
2
action-
bullets under budget, and so the timeline is September, October, November to review eliminated programs and positions, and to prioritize them by December.
I forgot about that thing.
Yeah, it was
You
already
already
in the
did
budget.
Yeah.
Okay.
It just
already
wasn't.
done.
I'm just
voted
that
out.
fabulous. No, we are.
Any other
Good
comments?
idea, though.
Wasn't it, though?
Any other comments on the goals? What we might change or restructure, or new goals, or goals we should take out?
I really don't like the 3-year
I don't
budget. I
either.
don't get that. It's not a tool that I think we need to develop and
I know it was something we had talked about, Carl, several years ago, about and we were talking with the selectmen, correct, in the finance committee? Is that how it kind of came about, or?
Yes, and of course, one way we could approach that is, as you know, the finance planning team has asked the municipal government and school administration to produce an estimated FY12 budget in the month of November. That estimated budget won't be comprehensive, it won't be line by line, it'll be issued in broad categories. We could, if there was a desire to develop a 3-year budget, we could use that format. In other words, with broad categories, I think that it could be done. I think where you get into trouble is when you try to project 3 years out what your general supply costs are gonna be and some of your more specific costs. But I think if we kept it in broad terms, and if the committee wanted us to do that, it's very feasible.
So maybe this should read to update the comprehensive budget and make a 3-year projection.
Something like that. It's less a 3-year budget than it is I think that's a good idea.
Projected.
Right.
Forecasting more. than
Forecasting, yeah,
anything.
yeah, 3-year forecast, yeah,
Forecast.
yes,
I think general budget line items forecasting over 3 years is pretty safe.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
big picture for us would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Obviously, we'd throw in some of the stuff that we've eliminated already in those.
Right.
Budget items.
Yep.
Well, it's a moving target, Carl, and we'll have to work it out.
Sure, no, but as long, see, what we've really done is made it a more general, when you
Yeah.
get into
Oh, the budget.
comprehensive
Yeah,
budget,
yeah.
it gets a little difficult.
Yeah, that's right. I said.
I think it'll help if we trend backwards, too. Gives you kind of a percentage over the general budget.
Which
That's how we do it.
historically
Yeah.
have done, yeah.
Yeah.
It's great. Anything else?
Would like the committee also to, if there are no other changes to the budget, would also like to take a minute and look at the timetable. Perhaps I could go over it quickly, Mel.
Sure.
Tonight's September 27th, top row, you are issuing your budget goals based on our discussion we've just had. That then allows us to kick off the budget season at the Administrative Council in the weeks ahead, where we use the budget goals as our underpinning for how we want to approach the budget year. And we end up having discussions with department heads, with principals, with the community, through all of the variety of formats that we use to put together a budget. We are clear on the fact that the budget that we will develop will be beginning with a so-called level services budget, and then based on the requests and the discussions we've had to date, we will also at the same time identify the reductions that we've made over the last 3 or 4 years, and at the same time include from the superintendent a prioritized list of what we would like to do as additions, or as add-ons, new positions, new programs, whatever they may be, for presentation to the school committee for consideration. So that really is what happens during these late fall and early winter months. As noted a minute ago, in mid-November, we would issue a estimate based on the broader categories that we've just discussed to allow the finance planning team and the community to get a general feeling, a general understanding for what this FY12 budget will ultimately look like. Moving forward, we wanted your feedback on when you'd like to see the preliminary budget. We list January 10th here because that's been the historic time in which we've issued this budget. Yet, given the fact that town meeting is now officially going to appropriate funds in the omnibus budget format that they use in June, the committee may or may not wish to push that preliminary budget back. So I'd like to pause here for your views on that point.
I think the governor's budget comes out, what, end of January?
Yes.
I'd like to see us at least wait till if we could, wait till the governor's budget is out. And granted, it still has to go through the Senate and the House, but that would at least give us some idea where local aid funding is headed. I don't know how the rest of the committee feels, but that's what, at least we'd have some indication of what we might get for funding versus no idea.
I think that's reasonable. I mean, I don't see the haste, given the fact that we're moving back this meeting, although the Board of Selectmen may feel differently.
Right.
I think that this makes a lot more sense for us, because instead of having a meeting where we're like, well, we don't know, we actually will have at least the first line of information, so that we can have a better discussion and give you better direction about where we want to see the budget go.
What are they asking at the finance planning team meeting as far as a budget progress?
I don't know. They do want the, as Carl said, they do want the estimate in mid-November, a rough estimate for level services or whatever our rough estimate is. Have they laid out? They really haven't, have they?
I think so in
They don't
specific
know.
terms.
I was just looking at that joint statement of intent.
Yeah, that's what I.
Well, but that's an old,
It's an old
right,
one, I
right,
understand
it's
it's
an old
old.
schedule.
And I
right.
understand it doesn't even take into consideration moving the meeting from April to
Right,
June.
right.
But just looking at that, I was just curious as to whether or not the finance committee and the selectmen had put together a new schedule for these, okay.
But there has been a push to have it earlier, and I just want to be clear that, and I don't want to speak for the rest of the committee, but we need adequate time to review the budget, and I hate having to make decisions about our budget without at least some indication of revenue that we would get, so.
So if everybody's okay with that, we'll move it maybe back to early February for that, Carl?
You know, I'll try to find out when, that's House 1 is what they call it.
Right.
When the governor's budget will come out. I don't know if that is published at this point, but I'll watch that carefully.
Okay.
And adjust the timetable accordingly, and at the same time, talk to the school committee about that.
Okay.
So, thank you for that. Moving on, upon the issuance of this preliminary budget, and again, that preliminary budget will quantify in very detailed terms what level services will cost us, but will at the same time have additional options for the committee to review. So then, during that February to March period, that is when the school committee might schedule its annual budget workshops, where we delve into the budget, where we begin to make decisions. At the same time, the public meetings and all of the various approaches we use to reach out to the community, the finance committee and the selectmen, that would take place in that February timeframe. One change we see here also is we have tentatively moved the public budget hearing back 1 month. It used to be in mid-March, but given again the fact that we never really know what the state legislature is going to do about Chapter 70 or what the local receipts are going to be, we've sat in budget hearings in March basically saying,
We don't know anything.
so we're recommending April. It could be a later period, but it's at least 1 month later at this stage. Is the committee comfortable with that kind of
Well, it makes
timing?
sense if we're
Yeah.
gonna have town meeting in June, too, I mean, right, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we will move ahead on that date, and then we're saying here then, when all is said and done, we would ask the school committee to vote a recommended budget on May 9th. These are all already scheduled school committee meetings. That will be around the time when the warrant's going to be going to press, so you'd need to take a position on that date. in anticipation of June 6th.
Same night, I believe we're not going to be